Hello, my friends. This is Nikki. Thank you for joining me for episode 128 of Learning About the Lord. We will be resuming with the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, part 6, and we will be reading from Maria Valtorta's Poem of the Man God, volume 2. The Lord is speaking, and he says, "Peace be with you. I explain the ways of the Lord to you that you may follow them. Could you follow the path that goes down on the right-hand side and at the same time follow the one on the left-hand side? You could not. Because if you take one, you must leave the other. Even if the two paths were close together, you could not walk any length with one foot in one and one in the other. Between the path of God and Satan's, there is a great distance, which becomes greater and greater, just like the two paths that come out up here, but as they run down the valley, they become farther and farther from each other, as one goes toward Capernaum and the other towards Ptolemais. Such is life. It bestrides past and future, good and evil. Man is in the center with his will power and free will. At the ends, on one side, there is God and his heaven, and on the other side, there is Satan and his hell. Man can choose. Nobody forces him. Do not say to me, Satan tempts us as an excuse for descending towards the low path. Also God tempts with his love, which is very strong, and with his words, which are most holy, and with his promises, which are most alluring. Why then should you allow yourselves to be tempted by only one of the two? By the most undeserving one to be listened to? Are God's words, promises, love not sufficient to counteract Satan's poison? So the Lord here is saying that we have free will and choice. We choose which path to follow, the path of good leading to God, the path of evil leading to Satan and hell. And also, if you're on the path of good, and you somehow find yourself slightly veering off some more, you only have to look about you with your eyes wide open and realize that you're no longer on the path of virtue and correct your steps and get back on it. That is something that God always asks us to do, to admit our sins, to confess them, to reconcile ourselves with God, and to get back on the path of goodness. Now the Lord is speaking again. Consider that is not to your favor. When a man is physically very healthy, he is not immune from contagion, but overcomes it quite easily. Whereas if a man is already ill and consequently weak, he will almost certainly die in the event of catching a new infection. And if he survives, he is more seriously ill than previously, because his blood lacks the strength to kill the contagious germs completely. This same applies to the superior part of man, and by that the Lord is referring to the soul. The soul is the superior part of man. If a man is morally and spiritually healthy and strong, you may be sure that he is not free from temptations, but evil does not strike roots in him. When I hear someone say to me, I approached this man and that one, and I read this book and that book, and I endeavored to persuade this person and that one to do good. But in actual fact, the evil which was in their minds and in their hearts, the evil which was in the book, entered my heart. I conclude, says the Lord, which proves that you had already created within yourself a suitable ground for penetration, which proves that you are a weakling, lacking in moral and spiritual strength, because we must derive some good also from our enemies. By watching their errors, we must learn not to fall into the same ones. An intelligent man does not become the laughing stock of the first doctrine he hears. A man saturated with a doctrine cannot make room in his mind for any other. This explains the difficulties met when one endeavors to convince those who are persuaded of other doctrines to follow the true doctrine. But if you admit that you change your mind like a weathercock, I can see that you are thoroughly empty, that your spiritual stronghold is full of breaches, and that the dam of your mind is leaking in hundreds of places, through which good water runs out and foul water runs in, and you are so stupid and listless that you are not even aware of it, and you do not see it. You are a wretch. Of the two paths, therefore, choose the good one and proceed on it, resisting to the allurements of senses, of the world, of science, of the demon. Leave half-faiths, compromises, pacts with two people, one opposed to the other, to the men of the world. They too should avoid them, if they are honest. At least you, men of God, must shun them. You cannot have them either with God or with the devil. You must not have them with yourselves either, because they would be of no value. If your actions are a mixture of good and evil, they are of no value whatsoever. The entirely good ones would be cancelled by the bad ones. The evil ones would lead you straight into the enemy's arms. Therefore do not indulge in them. Be loyal in your service. No one can serve two masters with two different minds. He will either love one and hate the other, or vice versa. You cannot be both of God and of Mammon. The Spirit of God cannot be conciliated with the spirit of the world. The former ascends, the latter descends. The former sanctifies, the latter corrupts. And if you are corrupt, how can you act with purity? Senses light up in corrupt people, and other lusts follow senses. You already know how Eve was corrupted, and how Adam became corrupt through her. Satan kissed the woman's eyes and bewitched them, so that every aspect so far pure became impure for her and roused strange curiosities. Then Satan kissed her ears and opened them to the words of a new science, his own. Also Eve's mind wanted to know what was not necessary. Then Satan showed her eyes and mind, now awake to evil, what previously they had not seen nor understood, and everything in Eve became sharp and corrupt. And the woman went to the man, revealed her secret, and persuaded Adam to taste of the new fruit, so beautiful to the eye and so strictly forbidden so far. And she kissed him and at him with mouth and eyes already fouled by Satan's gloomy disorder. And corruption penetrated Adam, who saw, and through his eyes he craved for what was forbidden, and he bit it with his helpmate, and fell from such height into mud. A corrupt person will draw another person to corruption, unless the latter is a saint in the true sense of the word. Watch your eyes, men, both the eyes of your bodies and the eyes of your minds. If they are corrupt, they can but corrupt all the rest. The eye is the light of the body. Your thought is the light of your heart. But if your eye is not pure, because since the organs are subject to thought, a corrupt thought will corrupt also senses. Everything in you will become obscure, and a seducing haze will create impure phantasms in you. Everything is pure in him who has a pure thought, which causes a pure look, and the light of God descends as a master where there is no obstruction of senses. But if out of ill will you have accustomed your eyes to disorderly visions, everything will become darkness in you. In vain you will look at the most holy things. In the darkness there will be nothing but blackness, and blackness will be the deeds accomplished by you. Therefore, O children of God, defend yourselves against yourselves. Look after yourselves diligently against all temptations. There is no evil in being tempted. An athlete prepares himself for victory fighting, but it is evil to be overcome because you are not prepared and you are negligent. I know that everything serves as a temptation. I know that defense is exhausting. I know that it is tiring to have to struggle. But think of what you will gain through these things. And for 1 hour of pleasure, whatever kind it may be, would you like to lose an eternity of peace? What does the pleasure of the flesh, of gold, of thoughts leave you? Nothing. What do you gain by rejecting them? Everything. I am speaking to sinners, because man is a sinner. Well, tell me the truth. After satisfying your senses, your pride, your greed, have you felt fresher, happier, safer? In the hour following your satisfaction, which is always a time of meditation, have you sincerely felt that you were happy? I have never tasted the bread of sensuality, but I will reply in your stead. No. Languor, unhappiness, uncertainty, nausea, fear, restlessness, that was the juice squeezed out of the hour spent in pleasure. But I beg you, while I say to you, never do that, I also say to you, do not be inflexible with those who make mistakes. Remember that you are all brothers, made of one flesh and one soul. Consider that there are many reasons why one is led to sin. Be merciful towards the sinners and kindly help them and take them back to God, showing them that the path they have followed is full of dangers for the flesh, the mind, and the spirit. Do that, and you will receive a great reward, because the Father who is in heaven is merciful to good people, and he knows how to give you 100-fold to one. So the Lord here is saying, watch your eyes. Do not allow yourself to become corrupted. Do not allow yourself to make a fertile field within yourself ready to accept temptation and sin. Sin is out there, temptation is out there, but close it to yourself. Be ever watchful to protect your soul. Be firm and vigilant. Your soul is the single most important thing that you have. Keep it pure for God. Do not allow yourself to fall into temptation and sin and evil and get off the pathway towards God. And we continue. There's a big disturbance. There's much excitement amongst the people who crowd around the path leading to the tableau. The people closest to Jesus turn their heads around. Everybody's attention is distracted. Jesus stops speaking and turns his eyes in the same direction as the others. He is serious and handsome in his dark blue tunic, his arms folded on his chest, while the first rays of the sun rising above the eastern peak of the hill shine on his head. "Make room, you plebeians!" shouts the angry voice of a man. "Make room for the beauty who is passing!" And 4 dandies, smartly dressed, come forward, one of whom is certainly Roman because he is wearing a Roman toga. They are carrying Mary of Magdala, the Magdalene, still a great sinner, triumphantly on their hands crossed to form a seat. And she smiles with her beautiful smile, throwing back her head and her golden hair, which is all plaits and curls held by precious hairpins, and a pale gold leaf strewn with pearls, which encircles the upper part of her forehead like a diadem, from which small light curls hang down to veil her splendid eyes, made larger and more seductive by a refined makeup. The diadem disappears behind her ears, under the mass of plaits at the back of her snow-white, completely bare neck, and her nakedness extends much further than her neck. Her shoulders are bare down to her shoulder blades, and her breast is even more so. Her dress is held on her shoulders by 2 little gold chains. It is completely sleeveless. Her body is covered, so to say, by a veil, the only purpose of which is to protect her skin from sunburn. The dress is of a very light fabric, and when she throws herself back, out of affection against one of her lovers, she seems to be doing so completely nude. "The desire of the goddess has been satisfied," says the Roman. "Rome has acted as a mount for the new Venus. Over there, there is the Apollo you wanted to see. Seduce him, therefore, but leave some crumbs of your charm also to us." Mary Magdalene laughs, and with an agile, provoking movement she jumps to the ground, showing her small feet shod in white sandals with golden buckles, as well as a good length of her leg. Then her dress covers her whole body. It is in fact a very wide one of snow-white wool, as thin as a veil, held tight at the waist, very low near her sides by a large belt made of supple gold bosses. And she stands on the green tableland, where there is a vast amount of lilies of the valley and wild narcissi, like a flower of flesh, an impure flower which has opened there by witchcraft. She is more beautiful than ever. Jesus stares at her, and she defiantly resists his look, while she smiles and twists lightly as the Roman tickles her. "Have respect for my innocence," she says, and causes the four of them to burst into guffaws. Jesus continues staring at her. As soon as the noise of the laughter fades away, Jesus resumes speaking, as if the apparition of the woman had kindled the flame of the sermon, which was losing intensity in its conclusion. And Jesus no longer looks at her. He looks instead at his audience, who seem embarrassed and scandalized at the event. Jesus says, "I told you to be faithful to the law, to be humble and merciful, to love not only your brothers by the flesh, but also those who are brothers because they were born like you of man. I told you that forgiveness is better than hostility, that compassion is better than stubbornness. But now I tell you that you must not condemn unless you are free from the fault you wish to condemn. Do not behave like the scribes and Pharisees, who are severe with everybody except themselves, who call impure what is exterior and can only contaminate what is exterior, and when they receive impurity in their very depths of their hearts. God does not stay with the impure, because impurity corrupts what is the property of God, souls, and in particular the souls of children who are angels spread over the earth. Woe to those who tear off their wings with the cruelty of devilish beasts and throw those flowers of heaven into the mire by letting them taste the flavor of material things. Woe! It would be better if they died, struck by thunderbolts, rather than commit such sin. Woe to you, rich and fast-living people, because it is amongst you that the greatest impurity thrives, and idleness and money are its bed and pillow. You are now sated. The food of concupiscence reaches your throats and chokes you, but you will be hungry, and your hunger will be terrible, insatiable, and unappeasable forever and ever. You are now rich. How much good you could do with your wealth! Instead, you do so much harm, both to yourselves and to other people. But you will experience a dreadful poverty on a day that will have no end. You now laugh. You think you are triumphing, but your tears will fill the ponds of Gehenna, and they will never cease. Where does adultery nestle? Where does the corruption of young girls hide? Who has 2 or 3 licentious beds, in addition to his own matrimonial one, on which he squanders his money and wastes the strength of a healthy body given to him by God, that he may work for his family, and not to wear himself out through filthy unions which place him below unclean beasts? You heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery." But I tell you that he who looks at a woman lustfully, that she who wished to go with a man, has already committed adultery in his or her heart, simply by that. There is no reason which can justify fornication? None. Neither the abandonment nor the repudiation of a husband, nor pity for the repudiated woman. You have one soul only. When it is joined to another soul by a pact of faithfulness, it must not lie. Otherwise, the beautiful body for which you sin will go with you, O impure souls, into the inexhausted fire. Mutilate your body rather than kill it forever by damning it. Come to your moral senses, O rich men, verminous sinks of vice, so that you may not disgust heaven. Mary Magdalene, who at the beginning listened with a face which was a dream of allurement and irony, sneering now and then, at the end of the sermon becomes livid with rage. She realizes that although Jesus does not look at her, he is speaking to her. She becomes more and more livid and rebellious, and at last can resist no longer. She spitefully envelopes herself in her veil, and followed by the glances of the crowds jeering at her, and by Jesus' voice which pursues her, she runs down the slope of the mountain, leaving strips of her dress on the thistles and dogrose bushes growing on the edges of the path, laughing out of anger and mockery. So we will end today's lesson here. Here the Lord is pointing out the sins of adultery, the sins of choosing to sin and taking yourself off the correct path. And he also reminds us, while we are to choose to live without sin, we must still be merciful and humble and loving to those who have sinned and try to bring them back to the correct path towards God. I thank you all for listening. I ask the Lord to bless you. Go with God.